40 feet. That is how far a fully harnessed construction worker fell when the scaffold underneath him gave way, on a high-rise office tower under construction in San Francisco. A second worker fell 30 feet. Same structure, same moment. Both men were tied off. Both men survived. And the detail investigators looked at afterward is the exact thing most safety training skips when it teaches you how a harness is actually supposed to work. According to OSHA, falls remain the single leading cause of death in the construction industry. In 2024, 389 of the 1,034 construction worker deaths recorded in the United States were fatal falls to a lower level, more than any other cause. OSHA's scaffold standard requires fall protection once a worker is more than 10 feet above a lower level. If you work on scaffolding more than 10 feet up, this incident applies directly to you. Because the two men in this story did almost everything right. They were harnessed, they were tied off, and they still fell. Here's what's confirmed. On a Thursday afternoon in February 2014, two carpenters were installing vertical scaffolding on a high-rise office tower at 350 Mission Street in San Francisco, a building that would later become a Salesforce office tower. According to fire department officials, at around 2:20 in the afternoon, the scaffolding gave way. One worker fell 40 feet. The other fell 30 feet. An electrician working across the street watched it happen. He later told reporters his eye was fixed on the worker at the top and described watching him instinctively reach his arm down as he fell before hitting the ground. Both were wearing harnesses, tied off to the structure they were erecting. Both men survived. According to the contractor, one was treated and released from hospital within days. The other was expected to make a full recovery. The California Division of Occupational Safety and Health, Cal/OSHA, opened a formal investigation, and the site was shut down while that review took place. The contractor said it would carry out its own forensic review to determine what failed. Now here's the detail that matters for every worker watching this. Both men were tied off. That's the part of the story people skip past, because the instinct is to think, if you're harnessed, you're protected. But a harness only stops a fall if it's anchored to something that does not move, collapse, or fail along with you. In this case, what's confirmed is that the workers were attached to the very scaffold structure that tipped over. The exact technical cause was never made public. Cal/OSHA's investigation findings weren't released, and the contractor's internal forensic review wasn't either. But the basic fact pattern raises the question every worker should ask. When your line is tied to the same thing that's holding you up and that thing fails, your harness has nothing solid left to hold on to. This is the gap in how a lot of fall protection training gets taught. Workers are told, wear your harness, tie off, you're covered. But OSHA's own rule for fall arrest equipment, 29 CFR 192-6.502, Section D, 15, spells out something more specific. It requires that anchorages used for personal fall arrest equipment be independent of any anchorage used to support or suspend platforms and capable of holding at least 5,000 pounds per worker attached. A scaffold tied to itself is not an independent anchor, it's a closed loop. If the loop fails, everyone attached to it fails with it. Here's where this gets more complicated than most training ever explains. OSHA has issued formal written guidance addressing this exact situation. Workers tying off to the scaffold they are still building. And OSHA's own position is blunt. The agency has stated that during the erection and dismantling process, a typical scaffold is generally unable to meet the 5,000-pound independent anchorage requirement at all. Not that it sometimes fails to meet it. That, by the nature of a scaffold mid-build, the structure usually isn't rated to serve as its own fall arrest anchor in the first place. Think about what that means for anyone tying off while putting scaffolding together. The standard exists. The 5,000-pound rule is real. But the structure you're most likely to anchor to during erection, the scaffold itself, is, by OSHA's own description, often the one anchor point least likely to meet that standard. That's not a loophole. That's a known, documented gap between how the rule is written and how the work actually gets done on site. That gap is exactly why an independent anchor point, something engineered and rated separately from the platform you're standing on, isn't a bonus precaution. It's the entire reason the rule was written that way in the first place. This is not a small distinction. According to BLS, in 2024, the most recent year this data is available, falls, slips, and trips accounted for 370 of the fatalities among construction and extraction workers. And across all industries, just over 10% of fatal falls in 2024 were from a height of more than 30 feet. The clear majority were from far lower. In the prior year's detailed breakdown, BLS found that 64.4% of all fatal falls to a lower level in construction were from a height of between 6 and 30 feet. That's well within the range a properly anchored harness is built to stop. So if you work on scaffolding or any elevated structure, here's the question this incident raises. When you tie off, what is your line actually attached to? Is it an independent anchor point, rated for the load, and engineered separately from whatever you're standing on? Or is it the same structure that could move, tip, or come apart underneath you? If you're not sure, that's worth asking before your next shift starts, not after something gives way. Ask your supervisor or your safety officer to point to the specific anchor point your line is rated to use, and ask whether that anchor is independent of the platform you're working from. On most well-run sites, that answer is already documented. If it isn't, that's a gap worth closing today, not after an incident report gets written about it. That single question is the difference between a harness that does its job and a harness that fails right alongside the structure it's hanging from. 2 men walked away from falls that should have been fatal. That's not the kind of math you want to rely on. The real lesson isn't tie off and you'll be fine. It's know exactly what you're tied to. And that's exactly where the safety check we run on every video comes in. Now, before you move on, we do the 3-step safety check. Every video on this channel ends here, because information without action is useless. Go through that list of hazards in your mind right now. Which of those exist at your site right now? Not which ones could exist. Which ones do exist today? Be honest. Because the workers around you need you to be honest. For each hazard you identified, who owns the fix? In most jurisdictions, the employer or principal contractor is legally responsible for ensuring the site is safe. But supervisors have a duty to report, and workers have a right to refuse work they genuinely believe is unsafe. Know which category applies to you, and know what your rights are in your country. Do not wait for someone else to fix a hazard you can see right now. If you are a supervisor or safety officer, document the hazard today, issue a corrective action, set a deadline, follow up. If you are a worker, report the hazard to your supervisor in writing. Even a text message creates a record. If the hazard is immediate and serious, stop work. If you get no response, in the USA, file a complaint at OSHA.gov, in the UK at hse.gov.uk, in Canada at your provincial safety authority, in Australia at safeworkaustralia.gov.au. Every one of those reporting systems allows anonymous reporting. Use them. That's the file on this one. A 40-foot fall, a harness that did everything it could, and a question about anchor points that every worker on scaffolding should be asking. If this channel is helping you think differently about the hazards on your own site, subscribe. Every video here ends with the same 3-step check, because information only matters if you act on it. This has been Construction Safety Decoded. Stay tied off, and stay anchored to something that's actually going to hold.